Get started and everybody else can jump on a moving train because they're already late. So welcome everybody. Oh wait, more people are joining, and I had the chat so it didn't cover anybody's face. And then because more people joined, Josh, I couldn't see your face. I'm like, where's that guy? I'm going to cover Chris's face instead. Couldn't see plenty of Chris. So this is the first one of these, so it's going to be whatever it's going to be. We're really excited that you're all here. So welcome to the first salon in the RW Institute Makerspace. The Makerspace, I think most of you probably know, Chris and I are sort of working on creating a place for social impact professionals to kind of come together, be a little bit more sort of, I don't know. I'm thinking of a conversation that Graham and I just had where it's not about like necessarily being more authentic, but giving each other more access to different parts of ourselves that don't necessarily show up in these spaces, in the hope that by doing so, we're going to uncover and accomplish a little bit more than we would if we were just all trying to be our most professional version of ourselves. This is a salon, and there's going to be a couple of different ways that we gather, and this is the way where we bring in somebody who's got a really cool idea that Chris and I both find incredibly interesting and compelling and want to just sort of share it with other friends and sort of see who might want to gather and learn a little bit more. And if there's additional conversations to then have following up on these kind of things, and starting with David at Prosocial is a pretty big kind of fun way to start all of this. There will be future salons where you'll actually get some pre-reads in advance. We're working out sort of actually having a process to this, but mostly we think this is pretty foundational and fantastic in everything we're trying to do. And we think a lot of people either know or are aware of Prosocial and would just love a chance to come in and actually have a conversation with David, who co-authored the book on Prosocial and is part of Prosocial World. And there will be some.
I wrote the book on Prosocial.
Yeah, this is the same thing.
Nobel Prize winning co-author, right? Ostrom. So we're going to save the big round robin introductions that normally take up like 20 or 30 minutes of every call, and assume that you all can find each other either in our LinkedIn group or on LinkedIn. We'll find ways to make sure people connect. And then we'll just hope that everybody can sort of add, ask, and offer as we go along. I know everybody here and sort of know and trust that this is going to be a pretty amazing conversation. David and Josh, just real quick, I don't know if you guys have had a chance to talk, but I was introducing you offline separately because Prosocial clubs and Prosocial World and all that stuff.
Oh, you're the Prosocial clubs guy.
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful
Okay. I've checked into
Thanks for having me.
I've checked into your website a little bit. So yeah, I'm eager to interact with you, of course.
So that was me sort of wandering around a little bit on the first one of these, and welcome to everybody. And I wanted to toss it over to Chris, who can do the really fun sort of hype game for David and pretend like this is a big pro wrestling match. And then we'll all go get ready to rumble with some really cool ideas.
All right. Well, the way it's going to work, just like Tim mentioned, is David is going to share some concepts for about 10, 15 minutes. And then our thought is, yeah, but so what? That's your thought through the whole thing for every lab, every salon. So what? So how does this matter to me? So what do I do with this? So how would that work in my context? And I have 10 hard-hitting questions that I came up with. In a world of hierarchical structures where only narcissists survive and thrive, how in the world could a pro-social approach even be considered to be implemented? That's the first one, and that's an easy one. So we're going to go from there and get really rough and tumbly. But I mean, David, having you on is amazing. David, the book that was just mentioned is the one we're looking at in our book club. For those of you who might want to join up for that, pulling that together. And we're going to read the book. I told people on a call with Prosocial yesterday, a bunch of academics with really lousy LinkedIns. So it's hard to know what they're really doing or talking about. But anyways, the academic world needs a LinkedIn training, I think. Except for David's is actually really good. So, but he's that kind of interlocutor between those two worlds. And the book is phenomenal. I read it twice. Then I left it aside. It rained, decided to buy a new one and read it again to get all the notes back in. It's never as good as the first 2 times, but it's our theory of change. The multi-level selection theory that comes from Miss Ostrom is just Dr. Ostrom is phenomenal, and I think it's the future. So we're thrilled to have you here, David. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We can talk about whatever you want. You don't have to answer any questions you're uncomfortable with, obviously. And for everybody else, I really appreciate you putting your name and everything in there. We'll get to know each other. And Tim, you're going to share about a LinkedIn group that we can all join at the end if you want to practice our LinkedIn skills even further. David, I would give more of an intro about you, but instead of taking up the time talking about you with you here, which is kind of a waste, there's a Perplexity page and a bunch of links in the actual invite to this. I'm going to put them up again in the chat as we're talking. And you can use the Perplexity page to continue to understand the work or David's work itself. It's very interactive, obviously. So David, welcome. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I'm eager to move this into a give and take just as soon as possible. So I'm going to be as brief as I possibly can by introducing myself. I guess I started out, well, I like to say my father was a famous novelist. So my dad wrote The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit and A Summer Place, which were iconic novels of the 1950s. And so I think that I come from a storytelling background, even though I became a scientist. And when I became a scientist, I, first of all, I studied evolution. And in the second place, I studied the evolution of altruism and cooperation. And basically this question of how does being good to others, unto others, how can that evolve in a Darwinian world? Because Chris, you just said, we talk about the business world as being Darwinian. And by that, we mean it's good dog eat dog. We use that phrase. It's all a matter of individual level competition. How can the opposite of that actually thrive and prosper? And isn't that what we want? And so that question does have an answer. And so we can actually explain the presence of goodness and altruism and what we call those things in human terms in the animal world and the plant world, by the way. And then to go beyond that and to begin to study all things human from the same perspective is something that's happening in science only very recently. I don't want to get too geeky on you, not that you couldn't take it, but for most of the 20th century, the study of evolution was confined to genetic evolution. And what's happened more recently is that the study has expanded to include all evolutionary processes. So that means cultural evolution, human cultural evolution. And each person is an evolving unit. Each and every one of us is an open-ended, evolving system. And so all of a sudden, this theory, which has proven itself in the study of biology, is now in a position to be employed for all things human, really, including. So in my career, I studied religion, very much so. More recently, economics, collaborating with Elinor Ostrom, as we've said, and then moving it into the practical realm, rethinking economics and business. And so these are all, I think, potent ideas that lead to new, I think, practical strategies for how we work as organizations at multiple levels, and but also in all other aspects of our lives. So as human beings, in addition to our workplace environments. And so Prosocial, the book, actually brings that down to earth in terms of providing advice for organizations to become true things. And here's where I think I'll end up. Two things that all groups need. One is to be well governed, and the other is to be adaptable, to be capable of change. All groups need these two things. And if we can provide these things, then wouldn't that be great? So I think that that's kind of my mission. And I guess a final point I'll make is that what if you look at any kind of group, including business groups, what you'll find is that they vary in how well they function as groups. You'll always get a distribution, and there'll always be a high end of that distribution. So out there, no matter what kind of group you study, you find some outstanding, high-performing groups. On the other end of the distribution, you find the groups that are melting down, and then most groups are in the middle, muddling along somewhere in the middle. And isn't it nice to know that in all cases, these high-performing groups have actually adopted what we call these core design principles. They've converged upon it in many different ways. So there's common denominators that we could learn about in general terms, and then we could help all groups become like that. But there are many positive examples, including positive examples in the business world, that we can learn from as we work to make all groups more like that. So I think, Chris, I'm going to stop right there just to keep it as brief as I possibly can.
Okay, good. Let's dig in. So just to set it up, this book. There it is. This is my rained on version. It has mold and noxious. Anyway, this is the book, Prosocial. And the idea is that our current systems of management are based on, I don't know, the Industrial Revolution and cogs in the wheel, and the guy who said that he could teach a monkey to do any of these artisans' work if he just, what was it? That wasn't him. What was the guy the father of modern management, David?
I'm not sure who you're referring to.
Yeah, the whole idea was everybody was, making a broom. It was an art. No two brooms were alike. No guns were alike. Everything wasn't interchangeable. And then people came along with this idea of standardization, and one of the biggest breakthroughs of the Industrial Revolution. In fact, it's the reason the British were superior on the oceans. It's not that they had more boats. They standardized pulleys. One of the biggest friction points in getting a ship back out to sea was pulleys, because they were all built individually. This guy came before Parliament. He said he could make the British Navy the best in the world. And he just said, give me this much money in a factory. And they laughed at him. But they did it, and pulleys catapulted them forward. And that's how they established their empire. So this idea of standardization applied to humans means just tell them what they can do, tell them what not to do, stick them like a monkey on the factory line. That was the phrase that was used. Cog in the wheel, that's where we get that from. But now we know it's not really a wonderful life for anybody. It pulled us out of poverty, but it also allows capitalism to go to its extreme end, where we become commodities to be consumed by the system itself. So with that in mind, this multi-level selection theory of David Wilson says, look, things don't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be dog-eat-dog world. Elinor Ostrom, she, with the solving the problem of the commons, based on what she saw worked around the world with shared resources. They didn't share the resources where I was from, off of Newfoundland, and we destroyed the cod industry. But that doesn't happen everywhere. Some places, everybody says, let's share, let's put some rules in place, and I'm going to put up the 8 principles. But David, can you just sketch out for us a sort of a compare and contrast between modern management and what you're proposing? Maybe the top 2 or 3 things while I pull up the 8 principles, and then we can dig into that. And while I do that, I want everybody to know this is your conversation. So while I might facilitate a bit of it, once we kind of get a grasp on what we're talking about, I'd love for you to ask some questions or you saw my ask offer, which is great. Oh, and some people have been doing it. Oh, that's phenomenal, Josh. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to get to that in a second. Let me get the 9.
Let me list in words the 8 principles. And here's a study I did, and it's something I often do in front of an audience, and this is one where I'm going to list these 8 principles. Please keep a group in mind. Bring a group to mind, any group that you like, a workplace group or any other kind of groups, and just ask yourself the question, does your group work well or poorly? And might these core design principles be the difference between a group working well or poorly. This can be done in less than a minute. So these groups that work well, in the first place, they have a very strong sense of identity and purpose. This is the most important one. Does the group have a meaningful purpose? And also, do we know, am I a member of the group? So what is the boundaries of the group? And first and foremost, is there a strong sense of meaning and purpose? Number two, are benefits proportionate to cost? It's not sustainable if some members of the group do most of the work and other members of the group get most of the benefits. There must be some sense in which what you get from the group is proportionate to what you give. And that goes for companies where the CEO makes 300 times more than the average uh, employee. Number three, decision-making needs to be fair and inclusive. It's not sustainable for some members of the group to call the shots and for other members of the group to be influenced by decisions that they don't have a part in. There must be a sense in which everyone takes part in the decisions that affect them. Number four, monitoring agreed upon behaviors. We have to know that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. If we can't monitor, then all bets are off. Number five, appropriate responding to helpful and unhelpful behaviors. If you're not doing what you should, then something needs to be done about it, but it needn't be nasty or mean. It can start out gentle or friendly, but at the same time, it must be capable of escalating. And in extreme cases, it must be possible just to exclude somebody from the group. And while we're correcting misbehavior, we need to be praising and rewarding good behavior. And in some of the, not just socially, but materially, and in some of the best performing companies, they have a rule. It's like a 6-to-1 ratio of praise over criticism in what people are doing. Number six, fast and fair conflict resolution. Conflicts will occur, and they need to be resolved fairly in a manner that's respectful of all parties. The best performing organizations are really good at identifying and resolving conflicts at the very beginning of their stages. Number seven, authority to self-govern. People have to have elbow room in order to do what they see fit. They can't be just dictated from the outside. And then number eight, appropriate relations with other groups, which embody the same principles. And this is huge because what it means is that these principles are scale independent. They govern your relationships between groups in addition to your relationships within groups. So with apologies for the brevity, in the research that we've done along these lines, what we showed was that in the first place, indeed, all groups need these core design principles. The more they implement them, the better they function as groups. And number two, our research shows that on average, business groups are deficient in all 8 of these core design principles, all 8 on average, with the biggest deficits being number 7, local autonomy. In other words, many people in their workplaces can't see their jobs as they see fit. Number 2, strong sense of identity and purpose. Many people don't find meaning in their work. They don't find their jobs to be meaningful. And number 3, decision making. They're bossed around by decisions in which they don't play a role. So deficient in all 8. And I see that you're nodding your heads. Obviously, this is familiar to you. And when we ask why is it that business groups are deficient in all 8, I think there we can trace it to just the way we think about business, more or less dominated by the economic paradigm. Very highly individualistic. It goes on and on. But that's your world, so you know it better than I do. And so the question becomes, how can we act upon this information and do a better job implementing these core design principles in businesses?
So, David, a pro-social approach, and right after this, Josh, I want to come to your questions, and thanks again for asking them. If you've got questions or ads or offers, it's phenomenal. what's different? Like, how does it, I understand the core design principles. Couldn't we just apply them in a hierarchical structure coming out of the Industrial Revolution? When I read your book, it seemed like you were suggesting a far different way of organizing teams and then operating on them. And for everybody else, there are tools in the book for how to do some of these core principles, like figuring out resolving disagreements or interpersonal problems and that kind of thing. Really kind of very cool, simple tools to use. But David, how would you describe fundamentally the paradigm difference between the two?
Well, let's see, I'm not sure that I'm say it again, Chris, because just to make sure that I get your
Yeah. Current performance management. And you know what, Graham, maybe you could package this question even better than me, but current method, and because this sets us up, Josh.
well, so I mean, that's enough of a prompt. Current performance management. And I have colleagues who are in the management field. And so at the professional level, we can point you to literature and so on. Very much when it attempts to manage systems, because it more or less has the standard economic model in mind, that dictates certain solutions, and mostly providing financial incentives, more or less assuming that the individuals are profit maximizing agents. And so if you want to influence them, then you provide certain financial incentives. It leads to practices such as forced distribution ranking. And I think this is a really good model example because it's so common that we said, doesn't it make sense to rank everyone in your organization for their performance, to reward the high performers, to coach the middle, and to let the bottom go? And when you do that, what are you really assuming? You're assuming that the performance of an individual is actually an attribute of the individual, when in fact, in any organization, the performance of an individual is a product of social interacting. And by using that strategy, you're discouraging any behavior which makes somebody else look better than you do. And so competition, and this is one of the most important take-homes, is competition is a double-edged sword. Yes, we need competition, but we need competition for cooperative arrangements. And if we don't have that, when we have competition, is actually leading to the cessation of anything that we might call cooperative. And so what the new paradigm does is, when we're faced with the same problem of performance management, then we just have different solutions in mind, very different solutions in mind. And some of the best companies that I've surveyed, for example, if somebody is underperforming, the assumption is this is a systemic problem. You're probably a very smart individual doing your best. And if it's not working out for you, then there's not a good fit somewhere. Let's try to find a better fit. Isn't that a better way of doing it than just saying you're deficient as an individual and that it's up to you to do something about it? So what it does is it results in a different repertoire of strategies for how to manage the organization. And it begins with like genuine caring. Again, I have specific companies in mind, that in a company which truly, no greenwashing here, I mean, they really care about their employees and demonstrate it in every way. This unleashes so much loyalty and a sense of meaning on the part of and these companies, the one in particular, let me just name it. It's called Barry Waymiller. It's a manufacturing company. They just make stuff. So there's nothing noble about what they make. They make the machines that make toilet paper, that kind of stuff. So there's nothing exalted about the purpose of the company, but because they're so genuinely caring, then that's what gives these um, um, the work such a strong sense of meaning and loyalty and so on and so on and so forth. So I can say more about that particular company, but let me turn it over to others.
Okay, great. So we're going to go to your question here, Josh. I appreciate that. Do you want to come off and ask it? In addition to beliefs plus big stories shaping your behavior, I'd
Yeah.
love to hear. Go ahead.
Thanks so much. I'm learning so much, David and team. Thank you for creating space. I think I'm reflecting on the meta story that I understand that beliefs and stories shape our behaviors, but I have this strong intuition that our behavior can also shape our stories and culture, and it seems especially useful to try to figure out behaviors that will create a new pro-social culture within an antisocial environment. I'm curious if you've seen that work, and if you have, if you would cite any evidence that is a pathway that's effective.
This is, again, just to make sure I have your meaning, Josh.
This is instead of assuming we need to create belief or belief system, then go on downstream to affect behavior. Instead, we create behaviors that shape and create belief systems.
Yeah,
Does
I think
that
that's
sound-
definitely. Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And there's a whole other dimension to this that often gets overshadowed. It's the adaptability part, and the adaptability part is based on basically mindfulness-based therapeutic methods. If any of you have heard of acceptance and commitment therapy or other forms of mindfulness-based therapy, it's very much one of kind of a practice. Again, I'm feeling a little bit tongue-tied because we have only a short time together, but it's very much a case of basically, and this is increasingly how they're thinking about it, a managed process of cultural and personal evolution. So all of us are products of evolution at one scale or another, genetic, cultural, and personal. And very often evolution shapes us in a way which is not for our long-term welfare. That sounds strange, but often evolution shapes us to be basically benefit ourselves, but not others, our groups, but not other groups, our short-term welfare, but not our long-term welfare. And so evolution becomes part of the problem. And we've all been shaped to do things which might be adaptive in a very limited sense of the term, but not in a sense that's for the good of us all or even ourselves over the long term. And so given that, we have to manage the evolutionary process, starting with ourselves. And so we have to basically, what do we want to become? What's our valued goals? How would we act on that behalf? What's inside our heads that gets in the way of that? How do those things cause us to behave in a counterproductive fashion? And how do we accept that and commit, that's where acceptance and commitment training comes in, to work around them in order to meet our valued goals? And do you know that this little algorithm that I just described is so validated that there's like over 1,000 randomized control trials demonstrating the efficacy of this method. We really want to know about this for ourselves and for our organizations. And in our applications listed in Prosocial, including one outstanding case study, Chris, which I'll make that article available, this combination of governance plus adaptability was implemented in a sizable organization, which was then followed over now an 8-year period. We had the means to follow it. And so not only was there an effect, but that effect kept getting better and better because what we'd succeeded in doing was making the organization more adaptable. And so it was getting better and better on its own. So it's so it can be done. There's a good theoretical foundation for it. And there are case studies, some of which more or less, these are organizations discovering this on their own. And in other cases where we've been successful with our own methods.
Awesome. Josh, we're going to come back to you. So think about how you might want to add to that. Great question. Esther, you want to ask your question? I know you wrote it out there, so we'll know if you changed your mind on it, which you're allowed to do in light of what you just heard. If it evolved in your mind, go for it.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. And hi, David. Thanks for sharing. So the question I had was just how do we think about these principles for the ones that we might not have control over? So the one that I highlighted was, for example, number 2 around equitable distribution of costs and benefits. And I think the example used was the disparity between pay between the CEO and perhaps their lowest paying employee. I have zero control or influence on that decision as part of an organization. So how do I get to any sort of alignment or agreement to this principle in practice if it's something that I, again, don't have any control or impact on?
Yeah, that's a great point. And so we're all in that situation to a degree. We're operating in systems that are beyond our control. And so you basically have to find, what you can control, and you have to work with that. And then you have to also, I think we often talk about bottom up meets enlightened top down. I think it's very important to appreciate the control that we do have, every individual does have to an extent over their lives and their social interactions at the smallest scales, their relationships with their partners, their families. We all have some degree of control in which we can help to implement these core design principles. And then we have the opposite of that. But there are top-down, in other words, people and organizations in a position to influence things underneath them. And not all of them are hostile. Some of them actually begin to get it. And it's at that point that they could solve some of these larger problems. And an example that's often cited is Satya Nadella at Microsoft, who's a very different type of person than Steve Ballmer or Bill Gates. The previous organization was hyper competitive, including the famous org chart with all the revolvers pointing at each other. Satya Nadella is a different kind of person, mostly based on his personal history, nothing he learned in business school. And but nevertheless, in that position, can do something about that. And I think you could also this is where a little bit of science comes in, you could actually just state the facts of the matter. For example, there's a very good literature on sports teams, which shows that when there's too much salary dispersion in sports teams, they function less well as teams. And I think the more you get this across, then the more it becomes normative. It's basically simply seen as wrong for there to be that kind of just unjust. So I think the narrative, back to the story, of creating this kind of paradigm change in a narrative sense can take something which is kind of never approved of, but still tolerated, and it becomes something which is more shameful, you might say. And there's other nations like Norway, for example.
Before we go to other nations, there's a follow-up though that could help in this particular situation, and it gives you a chance to get a drink, get that tickle out of your throat. And let me just put it here, and because Esther, I wonder if building on what you said earlier in terms of scale, at what scale do I have the agency to implement something like this? In these companies, they typically reward individual performers, even in their community impact is prosocial work. If they hit a certain number of hours or make a certain level of donation or something like that, you can kind of get on a leaderboard for a whole bunch of different things. And some companies even put a bunch of nonprofits against each other in some sort of like March Madness where you keep voting against them, and it gets down to the last 2 nonprofits, and whichever one wins gets the money and everybody else gets a little amount.
A
It's
hunger
like-
game for nonprofits.
Right. It's just a weird overlay on the kind of thing that we're doing. Because at the next level down, we're like, well, let's not do this down here. Let's actually help everybody, not make you fight for it. So when we think about these teams, Esther, and the way we kind of do reward and recognition, there's a disparity there. Potentially, maybe that's something that could be explored in this situation. Would that be a legitimate extension, extrapolation of your question? And then, David, I'd be curious to see what you have to say about it.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think my head was there, but that is a fair point and a probably more tangible. I mean, to David's point, there are just some things that are out of my control. So, I don't represent my company and, have no say in pay disparity. But in my current scope of managing perhaps a volunteer program and the ways that we reward or recognize or incentivize engagement participation, yes, there is probably something more that I can do and have control over and influence to ensure a level of fairness and equity, if that's the goal. So I can see that.
Yeah, and I've even seen, and David, I don't know if this gets to it, but sort of a collective reward. So when you're playing soccer, it's not that. Oh, I forget this one. I forget that one. But there's some sort, like if we all perform at a certain level, we all get something together. But so then it becomes incumbent to make sure that we're all helping each other. That's built into it. Does that get us closer to what we're talking about in a prosocial approach, or is that just something else?
Yeah, well, these things I think are easiest to demonstrate at a small scale, at the team scale. And I think in business, of course, much does take place as teams. And so I think that there's one method that this is one of these best practice methods, something called rapid results, where basically you a challenging objective, you form a team around it, you make sure the team has appropriate representation, including the workers in addition to the management. You cut them a lot of slack, you make it a really ambitious project, and what happens? They come to life, they work as hard as can be, and they regard it as a peak psychological experience. And so this becomes a tool that you can employ again and again and again. And when it comes to volunteer programs, which I'm super interested to get involved in, and if anyone wants to let me into the design of volunteer programs, please do. And because I think that
You're in. That is it.
Yeah.
I'm calling you up.
so, I mean, there's so much that you can do, but of course, have people function in the context of small, meaningful, and appropriately structured groups. This is something that can be done in so many different ways. Josh, it's what your prosocial clubs are about, I believe. And then once you demonstrate it at that level, then I think that the next point to make is, and often what happens in businesses that I know is that they do employ teamwork at that level, but then that sits underneath a more traditional command and control hierarchy. And it's back to your point, Esther, these things that you don't have control over. But the point is if it works well at this level, it works well at all levels. And you just have to make that point as compellingly as you can. And that's where the narrative comes in, basically. That's where, if you say science says this and so on, then that helps to do that.
So I want to go to Grace, your question in a sec. So get ready to ask. I know it's pretty simple. It's one of the biggest barriers. And conversely, maybe what's the most interesting principle to adopt? Like when people hear it, they're like, oh, that's a big win and that's easy. But before we do that, extending the question a little bit, many of the internal social impact teams, David, have to walk down the hall to get buy-in from IT, procurement, HR, for a whole bunch of weird little dangly pieces. None of them have responsibility to make it work, and all of them have authority to make it not work, right? So they can chop it up and make life miserable. What prosocial interventions effectively address this disconnect? Is there something in either the 8 core design principles or some of the other methodologies or approaches, or even examples that you've seen that would allow me to navigate that silo effect? And you can say no, by the way, if you think.
Well, one point I want to make is that I don't want to present myself as an expert, especially when I have much less experience in the actual business environments than anyone on this call. But I think what can be said is that, any sizable business is itself a multi-group organization.
Right.
And then it exists in a larger ecosystem in which it has even less control. There's some control within the organization. And because these principles are scale and domain independent, then they can be used for the whole organization in addition to the single groups within the organization. So conceptually, it's quite simple. And then I'll also say that because we do have this bell curve, and so that we always have positive examples to learn some in which companies have avoided the silo problem. So I feel like this is not very satisfying response, Chris, but in part just because more time is needed. And I think that a meaningful dialogue just requires more time.
Yeah.
And so on that point, I think that again, if a call like this initiates some more serious exploration as to what is the objective, what are we dealing with, what's the existing structure, it's going to be a multi-group organization, and then what would be the most flexible points in order to actually do something, then that's where the real collaboration would take place.
Awesome. Okay. Let's do your question here. I just threw it up in the chat again, plus the flip side. Do you want to just speak it? It's not real till you say it.
Not real. So we've seen other groups, obviously other countries, especially right now with what we're seeing, they have highly pro-social behavior. It's been proven. We have examples, frameworks, we have everything that we need if we wanted to implement something like that on a large scale, but we continue not to. So I'm curious as what you see either on a large scale or a smaller scale of things that we can affect in our daily work. What are the biggest barriers that get in the way of adopting this pro-social behavior, and what can we actually do about them?
Yeah, so let's just focus on national comparisons a little bit, because I said that they're scale independent. These principles are scale independent, and so that means that we could actually apply them at the national scale. And when you do that, the work of David Sloan, who the most recent recipient of the Nobel Prize in Economics, his work is about this, that nations vary in his work on a scale from extractive to inclusive. Some nations are more inclusive than others. They share their benefits, and they're also the ones that work best as nations. And so it's just a scaled up version of what I've been talking about. And the Nordic nations come out best. And, during the New Deal, Franklin Delano Roosevelt copied Sweden. So there was a sense in which the United States copied a Nordic country and was the better for it. But the reason these principles are not automatically applied have much to do with power. And people don't give up power easily. And the courtesan principles are all about checks and balances. In fact, they're basically the kernel of democratic governance. And if you look at hunter-gatherer societies, by the way, the primordial human society, they really represent these courtesan principles. Well, they're all about a combination of individual agency and collective action. So it's a struggle to do it, and you have to get people willing to basically subordinate themselves to the interest of their groups, to function as citizens. And that's not always easy. Of course, people don't give up power easily.
Cool. Okay, that's great. Tim, over to you. I was going to ask Josh, but Josh gave a link if you want to see what that's all about, Prosocial Club. Tim, do we have enough time before Josh?
Yeah,
So
I
Josh,
actually had a question that was not about closing us out. So I'd love to hear more about Josh's thing.
Okay.
The idea, I'm really thinking about what you said again, Esther, about how do you influence? And I'm wondering, in sort of an insurgent way, like if you can't get somebody to care about how you solve your problem, can you take a solution that you know really, really well and sort of fold their problem into it, or include them and use it to solve a problem they have, and then say, hey, see how well that worked? Like I can see it not like going like way up above you, but if there's like 6 other people and you have some sort of like peer plus 1 level team, and you're like, so there's this really cool thing that we could try together. This has been an intractable problem. Let's try doing this. And then you get them some success and you're like, so you know why that worked? Maybe we should try that someplace else. Just like trying to think, how do you, if you can't get them to jump on your problem, how do you shift the problem so that it encompasses shift the solution so that it encompasses their problem? And then you start kind of guerrilla warfare from there with getting them to be a little more pro-social. Anyway. Sorry, that was just, I really like, I love that problem, and I love the idea of like starting and seeing where you can go with it from there.
100%. A guerrilla warfare for good, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking, one of the fun things would be like, Josh, get him to go to like a thing that's totally outside of the work environment and go be pro-social in real life with like what Josh is working on.
What are you working on, Josh?
100%. So I will take this opportunity just to share, and David, to get your like guiding hands on this clay wheel early on. We created these networks of people who are showing up for each other and helping each other. That's purpose, or shared understanding about what we're doing. And it has been this transformative experience already. And so the way we've co-created it is essentially we join, we share our real bios, which is a more holistic sense of who we are and who we're becoming. Then we share what we sort of think of legs of the stool, or we share what we need right now, what we can offer other people, and what we're dreaming about. So needs, offers, and dreams. And those shares are, the term we use is they're tenderly held in escrow until there's a signal that 2 people should be connected to each other. And then once there's a signal, we pull up the full context for the people, and we send these like loving introductions between them. And almost always there's an initial signal, but then there are 2 or 3 other reasons that these people should be in touch with each other and in each other's lives. And then they show up for each other and tell a connection story that then creates that new story loop for the rest of the club. Lots of other mechanisms, but that's the core of it. And it's been really, really exciting. There's tons of energy to create lots of local place-based clubs here in San Francisco. Students at Stanford are doing it, folks in Austin, Seattle, Amsterdam, rural Sierra Leone. So we're going to become a club of club and tap into the abundance of the network using a protocol that we're developing, which, David, has to be informed by your principles almost directly. So I'm so thrilled to be learning from you and grateful for the introduction today. It's all open source, and we're doing this as a nonprofit. I should add.
Yeah, amazing.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. This company I talked about, Barry Waymiller, one thing that makes them extraordinary is that they've acquired over 140 other companies worldwide and turned them all around as well. And so this is just showing you that something is working. And I have podcasts with them, so I can provide links to these podcasts, which might be the very next thing for you to listen to. And, I was so incredulous about this. Are you kidding me? You're going to France and Korea and China and Bulgaria, and it works each and every time? And he said, yes, it does. Because they all say that this is the first time anyone's ever listened to me.
Mm. Mm.
You know, this treated me like a human being. It's just extraordinary. And, you know, Chris, when we talked earlier, our very last call, you said, you know, you're shocked in a sense, the more you got involved in business environments and the more you encountered a climate of fear. But the prevailing emotion in the workplace is to be scared and to be treated as chattel of some kind. And the big inspiration that this guy, CEO of RWI Miller was, he's just like, I treat my employees as like my own children, my own loved ones, basically. And he really means it. He happens to be motivated by, he's a good Christian gentleman. So, but that deep commitment to the welfare of the people in the organization, putting it above profits, basically, is what makes it profitable. And how many times have you heard that? That the companies that are most profitable are not chasing profits. So this is all just there. And I guess the point I want to make, maybe hopefully not the last one, is the importance of how we think about it, the paradigm, basically, the way, what's inside our heads. Because another thing that Bob Chapman, the CEO of this company, says is that he gets all these business gurus to come and look at what he's doing, and they all say, Bob, I've never seen anything like it. And my response to that is, well, it's not because it's not out there. It's because of the way you're thinking of the world, that this stuff is all around us, hiding in plain sight. And if you're not seeing it, it's because of what's inside your head. And if you can change that, and we can really begin to see things differently in terms of the whole nature of human groups and just what it means to be a human being, then this stuff is literally hiding in plain sight all around us, and becomes basically just commonsensical. And then what previously seems commonsensical becomes clearly pathological. That's what the inner work does. That's what the transformation of just the way we think about human social interactions and the whole nature of culture and all of this. It results in basically a sea change of common sense. And so it's so important to do that inner work in combination with the outer work in equal measure. That's another fundamental point to make, which I always feel in a short meeting like this. I have to talk like an auctioneer, but hopefully we can have more time, in which case we can get these key points across more effectively.
Yeah. And I think to that point, that's a really good way to sort of pause the conversation, and then we'll come back to a future conversation, hopefully with anybody who wants to. We'll come back and revisit all of this. One thing that I will note to everybody is I think everybody on this call that I can see has been invited to be part of or is currently part of the LinkedIn Makerspace Commons community. David, we're not connected on LinkedIn, so I haven't been able to invite you in yet, but we'll get you in there.
Okay.
We'll also send around follow-up of all the information to everybody, just so we have all of that information and some of the really good discussion that we've had in here. And then David, what's the best way for people to stay in touch with you if they have specific sort of follow-ups or questions for you?
Email hello@prosocialworld. I'll type it into the chat.
Okay.
But it's easy to remember.
It's just prosocial.world, right?
Yep, hello@prosocial.world. We'll get you connected to me, and you can see that I'm full of zeal. I have good news for you.
So this has been fantastic. I don't know, Chris, if you want to sort of close this out, but I just want to say thanks to everybody for showing up to our very first gathering. We're going to have several more, and we'll follow up on more ideas together. And then there's going to just be a lot more that we're kind of developing together, in terms of sense making, sort of collecting what we think is actually going to be real that we can do something about, and then finding interesting ways to innovate and making the world better. Or as Chris would say, make the future we want. So, Chris, do you want to say a last word before we close each other out here?
No, other than the personalities on the call are interesting in and of themselves. I would do one of these salons with each and every one of you. So come back. Let's stay connected, get to know each other, join that LinkedIn group, and get the book like Grace ordered it during the call. Way to go to lead us in that behavior. Phenomenal. It's a great book. Tell me what you think of the chicken story. Next time I see it, that's what I want to know. What do you think of the chicken story? Okay.
Oh, just go to the problem with super chickens.
The problem with super chickens.
It's a National Geographic podcast, only about 15 minutes.
It's also a good explanation of the current administration. It's dynamic.
Yes, Trump is a super chicken par excellence. Check out the problem with super chickens. 15 minutes will
And remember,
go on.
share the same DNA to some extent. So with the chickens, we're not that. Thanks, everybody. I love that you were all here. This is a great group to start with. Thanks, Ricardo. I know you're in the middle of things and you popped in enough too. So that's just awesome. Yeah, we'll send you all this stuff and can't wait to see you next time.
Everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.